The sound was almost silent, a grief so deep it had no voice. Hidden in the darkness of a school storage closet, a 9-year-old boy named Leo was folded in on himself, crying without a sound, convinced he was worthless. In his mind, he could still hear his stepfather's voice, the words echoing like a cold whisper. "Stop trying. When you talk, people aren't listening. They're just waiting for the broken toy to stop making noise." From the doorway, the old school janitor, Mr. Samuel, watched the boy tremble. His heart, which had seen 67 years of life, felt a coldness it had never known before. He had seen Leo's stepfather, Mark, at school events. He was a pillar of the community, a charming, successful lawyer who always had a perfect smile and a kind word for everyone. To the entire town, Mark was a saint, the perfect husband who had given a single mother and her shy son a beautiful life. But Mr. Samuel had just seen the devastating truth in a little boy's silent tears. He knew he couldn't just go to the principal. It would be his word against a powerful man, a janitor against a lawyer. And how could the boy tell his story when he was too terrified to even speak? The old man knew with absolute certainty that if he walked away, Leo's spirit would be crushed forever. So he closed the door quietly, pretending he had seen nothing at all. And in the silent hallway of that empty school, he began his plan. It was a dangerous decision, a quiet war waged in the dusty corners of a library against a monster hidden in plain sight. If you believe that the innocent must be protected, show your support with a like and subscribe so you don't miss the unforgettable moment this cruel mask is finally shattered for the world to see. Now this is how it all began. The house was silent. It was a clean, sharp silence, the kind that lives in rooms where everything has its proper place. Sunlight streamed through large, spotless windows, catching no dust in the air. It illuminated gleaming hardwood floors and stark white walls, decorated with tasteful, impersonal art. There were no smudges on the glass, no toys left on the floor, no chaotic signs of a child's life. In this perfect house, every object seemed to be holding its breath. In the living room, curled up on a sleek grey sofa, was 9-year-old Leo. He wasn't watching the large television mounted on the wall. Instead, he was staring out the window at a blue jay hopping across the manicured lawn. In his hands he held a worn book, its cover soft with use, but his eyes were on the bird, a small, vibrant thing in a world of quiet greys and whites. He was a quiet boy, one who had learned that silence was safer than the struggle of speech. His mother, Sarah, entered the room, her movements soft as if she too was careful not to disturb the perfect stillness of the house. She smiled when she saw him, a genuine, warm smile that was the brightest thing in the room. "What are you looking at?" "Sweetie," she asked, sitting beside him and wrapping an arm around his small shoulders. Leo's face lit up. He turned from the window, his eyes wide with the story he wanted to tell. He took a deep breath, a small habit he did before attempting any long sentence. I saw one at the P park," he began, his small body tensing with the effort. It was singing." Sarah listened patiently, her smile never wavering, but a flicker of anxiety crossed her eyes. It was the same look she got whenever Leo spoke for more than a few seconds, a quiet tension that lived just beneath her skin. She was always bracing herself for the struggle and for the judgment that might follow it. The sound of a key in the front door made them both jump. The silence of the house was not empty. It was the silence of anticipation, and it was broken the moment Mark walked in. He was a handsome man, tall and confident, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed perfectly at home in the immaculate surroundings. He owned the space, and the silence shifted to accommodate him. "There are my two favorite people," he said, his voice smooth and commanding. Sarah's anxious expression melted away, replaced by one of pure adoration. She stood up to kiss him, and Leo seemed to shrink back into the sofa cushions. "How was your day, honey?" Sarah asked. "Long," Mark said, loosening his tie, "but always better now that I'm home." His eyes fell on Leo. "And what about you, Chief? Cat got your tongue." "Today?" It was meant to be a joke, a playful jab, but Leo flinched as if he'd been struck. He simply shook his head, his eyes fixed on the floor. Sarah's smile tightened. "He was just telling me about a bird he saw," she offered, trying to bridge the sudden gap between her son and her husband. Later, at the dinner table, the tension was a third guest. The clinking of silverware against pristine white plates was the only sound. The food was arranged perfectly, a colorful, healthy meal that looked like something from a magazine. Leo ate slowly, pushing the vegetables around his plate. Sarah, ever the peacemaker, tried to spark a conversation. "Leo, why don't you tell Mark about the project you did in science class? The one about the V volcano?" Leo looked up, startled. All eyes were on him. He felt a familiar heat rise in his chest. He had been so proud of his project, a messy, wonderful creation of papier-mâché and paint. He wanted to tell Mark about it. He wanted to see a flicker of pride in the man's eyes. He took a breath. We made... He stopped. The word was caught in his throat, a tangled knot of sound. He squeezed his eyes shut and tried again. Mark sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of impatience. He put down his fork and gave Leo a look that was not unkind, but worse. It was filled with a tired pity that made Leo feel small and broken. "Take a breath, son. It's not a race," Mark said, his voice calm and reasonable. He turned to Sarah. "See? This is what I'm talking about. He gets himself all worked up over nothing. I just wanted..." Leo tried again, his voice trembling. Mark held up a hand, and Leo fell silent instantly. "Let's make it a game," Mark said with a thin smile. "Try to get the whole story out before I count to 10. Ready?" He leaned back, a look of amusement on his face. 1, 2, 3. Sarah laughed nervously. "Mark, don't tease him." "It's not teasing. It's motivation," he replied, his eyes locked on Leo. 4, 5. Leo stared at his plate, his face burning with shame. The story about his volcano, once a source of pride, now felt like a heavy stone in his stomach. He didn't want to talk anymore. He wanted to disappear. He shook his head, surrendering. "All right, game over," Mark said with a shrug, picking up his fork. "Maybe next time, champ." The rest of the meal passed in that same sharp silence. Later that night, Leo lay in his perfectly tidy room, surrounded by books. He wasn't reading. He was just holding one, the weight of it a small comfort in his hands. He looked around the room, at the posters of planets and dinosaurs neatly pinned to the walls. It was a room for a happy little boy, but Leo felt like a ghost within it, a silent witness to a life that was supposed to be his. He closed his eyes, and in the quiet darkness, he wished for a world without words. Maple Creek Elementary was a place of noise. It rang with the shrill cry of the 3 o'clock bell, the thunder of small feet on linoleum floors, and the joyful shouts of children released into the afternoon sun. For 28 years, this was the soundtrack to Samuel's life. He was the school janitor, a man who moved through the chaos with a slow, steady rhythm that went largely unnoticed. He was a part of the building itself, like the faint smell of cleaning fluid in the hallways or the gentle hum of the lights overhead. Mr. Samuel was a man of routines. He'd sweep the same corners in the same order, his movements economical and practiced. He saw everything from his quiet vantage point. He saw the fleeting dramas of childhood, the scraped knees, the whispered secrets, the tearful arguments over a shared toy. He saw the weary smiles of the teachers and the anxious faces of parents waiting in the pickup line. He was the silent observer of this small universe. On this particular afternoon, the air was crisp with the first hint of autumn. Samuel was sweeping near the main entrance, his dustpan filling with the day's debris of eraser shavings and stray glitter. The final bell had rung, and the wave of children had already crested and broken, leaving only a few stragglers behind. Among them was Leo. The boy stood by a large concrete pillar, his backpack slung over his shoulders, looking smaller than ever against the vastness of the school's facade. A young teacher, Mrs. Albright, knelt down to speak with him, her face a mask of patient encouragement. Samuel was too far away to hear the words, but he could read the scene perfectly. She was asking a question, and Leo was frozen, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with a familiar panic. He shook his head, unable to answer, and the teacher gave his shoulder a gentle, consoling pat before heading toward her car. Leo was left alone, his head bowed in a posture of quiet defeat. A moment later, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Mark stepped out, looking polished and unruffled. He flashed a brilliant smile at a passing parent and waved. He was the image of the perfect doting father. He walked toward Leo, his smile still in place. "Hey, Chief, ready to go?" Mark said, his voice carrying on the breeze. He led Leo away from the main entrance toward the side of the building where the cars were parked. It was a subtle shift, just a few yards, but it took them out of the direct line of sight of the remaining teachers. They stopped behind the very pillar Leo had been leaning against. Samuel continued his sweeping, his movements slow and deliberate, his path taking him just a little closer. He kept his head down, appearing absorbed in his work. Mark's charming facade vanished, as if a switch had been flipped. His smile was gone, replaced by a tight, angry line. He gripped Leo's upper arm, his fingers digging into the boy's thin bicep. "What was that with Mrs. Albright?" he hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "She asks you a simple question, and you stand there like a broken statue. You do not embarrass me, do you understand?" Leo tried to answer, a small strangled sound escaping his throat. I don't." Mark cut him off, his grip tightening. "Don't even start. Just get in the car, and I don't want to hear a single word from you on the way home." It was then that Mark looked up, his cold eyes scanning the area. They met Samuel's for a fraction of a second. The janitor had stopped sweeping and was looking in their direction. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The rage in Mark's face evaporated, replaced by a warm, paternal smile. His death grip on Leo's arm softened into a gentle, guiding hand on his shoulder. He even gave a little chuckle. "Just trying to build some character in this one," Mark called out to Samuel, his voice friendly and conspiratorial. "You know how it is. Got to toughen them up for the real world." Samuel didn't respond. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod and went back to his sweeping. He watched as Mark ruffled Leo's hair, an act that looked affectionate to anyone else, but Samuel had seen the boy flinch. He watched them get into the expensive car and drive away, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of exhaust and a deep, cold sense of unease. For a long time after the last car had gone, and the school had fallen into its evening silence, Samuel stood in the empty hallway. He leaned on his broom, his old hands resting on the worn wooden handle. He wasn't thinking about the floors left to mop or the trash, cans that needed emptying. He was thinking about the look he had seen in Leo's eyes. It was not the look of a child being toughened up. It was a look of pure, unadulterated terror, and it was a look that Samuel, in the deepest, most forgotten corners of his own memory, recognized as his own. The first seed of a terrible suspicion had been planted, and it was beginning to take root in the quiet soil of the old man's heart. A week passed. The memory of the incident at the school entrance lingered in Samuel's mind, a quiet, unsettling hum beneath the surface of his daily routines. He watched Leo from a distance, noting the boy's perpetually hunched shoulders and the way his eyes darted around, as if always expecting a blow. The suspicion in Samuel's heart had become a heavy, solid thing, a stone of certainty that he carried with him through the long, lonely hallways. On a Tuesday evening, long after the school had emptied, Samuel was in the library. A row of tall, wooden bookshelves had been pulling away from the wall, and it was his job to secure it. The library after dark was a different world. The silence was deep and ancient, filled with the ghostly whispers of a million untold stories sleeping on the shelves. The only sounds were the scrape of his tools against the floor and the low groan of the old wood. He was tightening the final bracket when he heard it. It was not a loud sound. It was a tiny, choked gasp, almost lost in the vast silence of the room. He froze, his wrench hovering in mid-air. He strained his ears, listening. There it was again, a desperate, muffled sob. It was the sound of a creature trying to cry without being heard. He put his tools down softly and began to walk, his rubber-soled shoes making no noise on the polished floor. He moved through the maze of shelves, following the ghost of a sound. It led him to the back of the library, to a forgotten corner where the history books were kept, their pages thick with the dust of disinterest. And there, wedged in the narrow space between the last bookshelf and the cold brick wall, was Leo. He was curled into a tight ball, his face buried in his knees, his small body shaking with silent, convulsive sobs. He had tried to make himself as small as possible, to disappear into the shadows. Samuel's first instinct was to speak, to offer some word of comfort, but he stopped himself. Words were a battlefield for this boy, so instead, the old janitor simply lowered himself to the floor, his old knees cracking in protest. He didn't sit too close, leaving a respectful distance between them. He just sat there, in the dusty darkness, a silent, patient guardian. He waited. Several long minutes passed. The boy's sobs, slowly began to subside, replaced by ragged, hiccuping breaths. Finally, Leo lifted his head, his face blotchy and streaked with tears. He looked at Samuel with eyes that were ancient, with a pain no 9-year-old should ever know. "Sorry," Leo whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. Samuel simply shook his head. He reached into his work vest and pulled out a clean, folded handkerchief, offering it to the boy. Leo took it with a trembling hand. They sat in silence for another minute before Leo spoke again, the story spilling out of him in a torrent of pained, fragmented words. He had been at home, and a friend had called. His mother had asked him to order a pizza for them over the phone, a simple task meant to encourage his independence. But on the phone, with his friend listening, the panic had seized him. The words wouldn't come. I couldn't, he stammered, fresh tears welling in his eyes. The man on the P8 phone, he laughed. That was bad enough, a small, sharp cruelty from a stranger, but it was what happened next that had shattered him. After he had hung up defeated, Mark had stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold disappointment. He told my friend to go home, Leo whispered, looking at the floor. And then he looked at me. Leo's breath hitched and he struggled to force the next words out. He said, You are broken. You are a broken thing that doesn't work. The words hung in the silent air of the library, ugly and unforgivable. Samuel felt a hot, righteous anger rise in his chest, a feeling so fierce it almost choked him. He wanted to march to that perfect, sterile house. He wanted to stand before that cruel, smiling man and do what? The reality of the situation crashed down on him with a crushing weight. He was a janitor. Mark was a wealthy, respected lawyer. If he made an accusation, who would they believe? They would say he was a meddling old man. They would ask Leo to confirm it, and the boy would be put on the spot, terrified, his stutter making him an unreliable witness in their eyes. Mark would twist the story, deny everything, and paint Samuel as a liar. He would lose his job. But worse, so much worse, Mark's cruelty toward Leo would surely escalate, happening in places where no one could ever see. Confronting the monster would only give it more reason to torment the child. He looked at Leo, who was now just staring into space, his small face a portrait of utter despair. The anger in Samuel's chest cooled, replaced by a steely, cold resolve. He could not fight this war with loud words and accusations. He would have to fight it Mark's way, in the shadows, with patience, with a plan. He reached out and placed a gentle hand on Leo's shoulder. The boy flinched at first, then relaxed into the touch. "You are not broken, son," Samuel said, his voice quiet but firm, the words clear and steady in the darkness. "You are not." He helped the boy to his feet and led him to the staff bathroom, where he helped him wash his face with a cool, damp paper towel. He found a forgotten packet of crackers in his locker and gave them to the boy, who ate them gratefully. There were no more words exchanged. None were needed. As he walked Leo back to the gymnasium, where the after-school program was just ending, Samuel knew that a line had been crossed. He was no longer just a witness. He was a protector, and he would find a way to save this boy, not with force, but with the one thing Mark could never understand, a quiet, unwavering kindness. In the weeks that followed their encounter in the library, a quiet and fragile alliance formed between the old janitor and the young boy. It was a friendship, built not on words but on shared silence and small, almost imperceptible gestures. Leo began to find reasons to linger after the final bell. He would forget a book in his classroom, or claim he needed to tie his shoe, his small hands fumbling with the laces until the hallways had mostly cleared. Then he would find his way to wherever Samuel was working. He would never speak first. He would simply appear, a small shadow in a doorway, and watch. Samuel, in turn, never pressed him. He would simply acknowledge the boy with a small, quiet nod and continue with his work. Sometimes he would invent a small task for Leo, holding a dustpan, straightening a row of chairs, or wiping down a low shelf. These were their conversations, a silent language of mutual trust. In these moments, surrounded by the gentle rhythm of the janitor's work, the tightness in Leo's chest would loosen, and he would breathe a little easier. For Samuel, the boy's presence was a quiet, constant reminder of the promise he had made to himself. He was the keeper of a fragile flame, and his simple job was to keep it from being extinguished. But their secret sanctuary was not destined to last. Mark was a man who noticed everything, especially imperfections in his carefully constructed world. He began to notice a change in Leo's routine. The boy was no longer waiting dutifully at the curb when he arrived. Twice Mark had to go looking for him, only to find him in the company of the old janitor, a look of placid contentment on his face that Mark rarely saw at home. It was this look of peace on Leo's face, a peace not provided by him, that ignited Mark's anger. It was a quiet, possessive fury. This boy, this flawed and broken extension of his own life, was finding solace in the company of a lowly janitor. It was an intolerable breach of his control. He saw it not as a friendship, but as an act of defiance. That evening, he chose his moment perfectly. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The house was filled with the warm, savory scent of roasting chicken. She was happy. Mark came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and kissing her neck. "Something smells incredible," he murmured. She leaned back into his embrace, a contented smile on her face. "It's just chicken. How was your day?" "Busy, but good," he said. He paused, his tone shifting from light and loving to something more serious, more concerned. "Honey, can I talk to you about something?" "It's been bothering me." Sarah turned in his arms, her expression immediately reflecting his feigned worry. "Of course. What is it?" "It's about Leo," he said, his voice a careful mixture of paternal concern and reluctance. "I'm a little worried about him. And this friendship he seems to be developing with the school janitor." Sarah looked surprised. "With Mr. Samuel? He's a sweet old man. He's been there forever." I know. And I'm sure his intentions are good," Mark said, choosing. His words like a surgeon selects his scalpels. "But honey, think about it. Leo is a vulnerable boy. This man, he's a lonely old person, and I think he's latching on to Leo. He's encouraging this victim mentality in him. The more time they spend together, the more withdrawn and shy Leo seems to become at home." He was lying, but his delivery was flawless. He made it sound like a painful but necessary truth. "I don't know, Mark," Sarah said, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Leo seems to like him." "Of course he does," Mark said, gently stroking her arm. "Mr. Samuel probably tells him what he wants to hear, that it's okay to be quiet, that it's okay not to try. But that's not what he needs. He needs to be challenged. He needs to build strength. What he needs is us, his family. We have to be his safe space, not some stranger at school. It's our job to protect him, and I feel like this man is undermining what we're trying to build." He saw the conflict on her face and moved in for the final killing blow. He lowered his voice, making it sound like a shared secret, a shared burden. "I just worry that if we let this continue, Leo's stutter will get worse. He'll retreat even further. We can't let that happen. We have to be a united front." That was the line that broke her. Her deepest fear was that she was failing her son. Mark had taken that fear and aimed it like a weapon at the one person who was actually helping. She looked at her handsome, successful husband, the man who had promised her a perfect life, and she made a choice. She chose to believe him. The next afternoon, when Leo came home from school, Sarah sat him down on the living room sofa. Her voice was gentle, but her words felt like a betrayal. "Sweetie, I know you like spending time with Mr. Samuel," she began, "but he's a very busy man, and I think we should let him do his job. From now on, I want you to wait for Mark or me at the front entrance right after school, okay? No more bothering the janitor." Leo stared at her, his eyes wide with confusion and a deep, wounded hurt. He wanted to ask why. He wanted to tell her that Mr. Samuel wasn't a bother, that he was his friend. But the words wouldn't come. He just nodded, the familiar feeling of shame and helplessness washing over him. The following day, Samuel saw Leo in the hallway after the bell. He gave the boy his usual quiet nod. But this time, Leo didn't meet his eyes. The boy looked at the floor, gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, and hurried away, his shoulders hunched. Samuel stood motionless, his heart sinking. He didn't need to be told what had happened. He knew with a crushing certainty that the monster had gotten to him through the one person the boy was supposed to trust. He had been outmaneuvered. His kindness had been twisted into a weapon and used against them both. He watched from the window as Mark's black car pulled up. He saw Mark get out and place a proprietary hand on Leo's shoulder, guiding him to the car. It was a picture of a father and son, but Samuel knew he was looking at a monster and his prisoner, and he knew in that moment of bitter defeat that his quiet, gentle approach was no longer enough. He needed a plan. The days that followed were the hardest. A wall of silence now stood between Samuel and Leo, erected by the careful, cruel words of a master manipulator. Samuel would see the boy in the hallways, a small, sad ship adrift in a sea of noisy children. Leo would keep his eyes fixed on the floor, his shoulders perpetually slumped in a posture of apology. The quiet light of trust that had begun to grow in his eyes was gone, replaced by a familiar, haunted emptiness. For Samuel, each averted gaze was a small, sharp pain. He felt a profound sense of failure. He was just a janitor, an old man with a broom and a good heart, and it wasn't enough. He had offered kindness, and that kindness had been turned into a weapon against the very person he was trying to protect. Mark had not only isolated the boy, he had isolated Samuel too, leaving him a powerless observer on the shores of Leo's silent suffering. He spent his evenings in the hollow quiet of the empty school, the rhythmic sweep of his broom doing little to soothe the turmoil in his mind. He felt trapped, outmaneuvered by a man whose cruelty was as polished and sharp as his expensive shoes. It was in one of these long, dark evenings as he was cleaning the library that the past came back to him. He was running his cloth over the spines of old books when his fingers brushed against a slim volume of poetry. He pulled it from the shelf. It was a book he recognized, a collection of simple, rhyming verses for children, and as he held it, the dusty scent of old paper filled his senses, and he was no longer a 67-year-old janitor. He was an 8-year-old boy again, a boy with a lisp so thick that every word was a humiliating struggle. He remembered the sting of laughter from his classmates. He remembered the hot shame that made him want to disappear. And then he remembered Mrs. Gable, the school librarian. She was a stern-looking woman with kind eyes, and she had seen his pain. She never made him speak in front of others. Instead, she had kept him after school in the quiet sanctuary of her library with a book just like this one. She had never told him to try harder or spit it out. She had simply read to him, her voice a low, steady rhythm. Then she taught him to tap his finger to the beat of the words, to feel the cadence of the language in his bones before he ever tried to speak it. It wasn't about fixing him. It was about giving him a new path, a secret map to navigate the treacherous landscape of words. She had given him a strategy when all he knew was fear. Standing there in the darkness, the old book in his hands, Samuel felt a jolt of clarity. The despair that had weighed him down for days began to lift, replaced by a surge of purpose. He had been a fool. He couldn't fight Mark's darkness with simple friendship. He had to fight it with a plan. He had to become Leo's Mrs. Gable. The next day, he put the first piece of his plan into motion. He approached Mrs. Albright, Leo's teacher, after the last of the children had gone home. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice humble. "I was hoping I might ask a small favor. The children's section in the library has become a real mess. Books all out of order. I was wondering if I could borrow one of your students for a few minutes each day to help me get it sorted. One of the quiet ones. Maybe Leo. He seems like a very careful and responsible boy." Mrs. Albright, who was tired and buried in a stack of papers to grade, looked up and smiled. "That's a wonderful idea, Samuel, and a great suggestion. Leo would be perfect. It might even help him come out of his shell a bit. Of course, you can ask him." He had his cover story. It was official, sanctioned. The next challenge was approaching Leo. He found him the next afternoon lingering near the coat racks, clearly waiting until the last possible moment to go outside and face the pickup line. Samuel walked over, his heart pounding a little. "Leo," he said softly. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with alarm, and took a half step back. "It's all right, son," Samuel said, keeping his voice low and calm. "I spoke with Mrs. Albright. She and I were hoping you might be able to give me a hand with a project in the library. Just for a few minutes each day. She said you were the most careful person for the job." He saw the war in the boy's eyes. The fear of his mother's warning was battling with the memory of the kindness he had been shown. The word project and the mention of his teacher seemed to make the difference. This wasn't a secret friendship anymore. This was a job, a task, something he was allowed to do. After a long moment, Leo gave a small, hesitant nod. Later that day, they stood together in the back corner of the library, their forgotten corner. It felt different now, charged with a new, secret purpose. Samuel didn't mention their old conversations. He simply pointed to a low shelf of colorful picture books. "Let's just start by putting these in order, from shortest to tallest," he said. They worked in a comfortable silence for 10 minutes, the only sound the soft shuffle of books. When they were done, Samuel wiped his hands on his trousers and sat down at a small round table. He pulled the old poetry book from a large pocket in his overalls and placed it between them. Leo eyed the book warily. Samuel didn't ask him to read. He didn't ask him anything. He simply opened to the first page and began to read aloud, his voice a low, steady murmur. He read a simple poem about a star, his words rising and falling in a gentle, predictable rhythm. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." He kept his eyes on the page, not looking at Leo, creating a space free of pressure. As he read, he began to tap his finger softly on the table, marking the beat of the words. Tap, 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 tap. He finished the poem and looked up. Leo was staring at the book, his expression unreadable. But then Samuel saw it. The boy's own small finger, resting on the table, gave a tiny, almost imperceptible tap. It was a quiet echo, a silent answer. The plan had begun. Their secret sessions became the new rhythm of their days. Every afternoon, under the official guise of the Library Organization Project, Leo would slip away from the noisy, chaotic world and enter the quiet sanctuary that he and Samuel had carved out for themselves. Their corner in the back of the library became a sacred space, a pocket of the world where the rules of fear and shame did not apply. They began each session with the simple, calming ritual of sorting books. It was a silent, meditative task that allowed the anxieties of the day to settle. Then the real work would begin. Samuel, drawing from the deep well of his own memories, became a patient and gentle teacher. He never focused on the stutter itself, on the broken sounds. Instead, he focused on everything around them. He started with breathing. He taught Leo to place a hand on his own small chest, to feel the rise and fall, to find the calm, steady rhythm that existed beneath the panic. "The words ride on the air, son," he would say in his low, quiet voice. "So first, we have to make the air calm." They would practice this for long minutes, just breathing in and out together, until the tension in Leo's shoulders began to fade. Then came the metronome. Samuel had brought it from his home, a small wooden pyramid that had sat on his piano for 40 years. He would wind it up, and the steady hypnotic would fill their corner. It was a heartbeat for the room, a pulse that was predictable and safe. It asked for nothing. It did not judge. "Don't try to talk," Samuel instructed. "Just whisper. Let the words be as soft as the air. Let them ride the beat." He would point to a line in the old poetry book, and to the steady rhythm of the metronome they would whisper the words together. "The sun is warm." Their voices were barely audible, two conspirators sharing a profound secret. For the first time, Leo experienced words not as a series of treacherous obstacles, but as a flowing current he could join. Slowly, miraculously, a change began. One afternoon, while whispering a simple verse about a boat on the sea, Leo completed a full line without a single hesitation. The words left his mouth smoothly, perfectly in time with the metronome. When he finished, he looked up at Samuel, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning pride. Samuel didn't cheer or make a fuss. He simply gave the boy a slow, proud smile and a single nod. In their quiet world, it was a thunderous applause. There were bad days, of course, days when Mark's coldness at the breakfast table had been particularly sharp, and Leo would arrive at the library with a knot of fear so tight in his chest that no amount of breathing could loosen it. On those days, the words would catch and break, and the old frustration would cloud his face. Samuel never showed disappointment. On those days, he would simply close the book. "The words are tired today," he would say gently. "Let's give them a rest." And they would spend the rest of their time sorting books, the silent work, a balm for the boys. Wounded spirit. This, more than anything, cemented their bond. Leo learned that this space was safe not just for his successes, but for his failures too. Their secret alliance began to spill out of the library in small, brave ways. In the lunch line, Leo, taking a deep and deliberate breath, managed to whisper a clear thank you to the cafeteria worker, who gave him a surprised and beaming smile. In the hallway, he and Samuel would sometimes catch each other's eye, and a quick, secret smile would pass between them, a silent acknowledgement of their shared mission. As the weeks turned into a month, Samuel knew that the boy's growing confidence was the only real evidence he had, but it was invisible to the one person who needed to see it most. He knew he needed to give Leo a way to show his mother the truth. He needed to arm him for one single, perfect moment. One afternoon, he brought a different book to their session. It was a slim volume of poems by Robert Frost. He opened it to a page he had marked. "I have a new idea," he said. "I think we should choose one poem, just one, and make it perfect. We'll make it our secret weapon." He pointed to the verse. The poem was "Nothing Gold Can Stay," a short, beautiful, and poignant piece about the preciousness of life. It was simple enough for a child, but deep enough for a man. "Why this one?" Leo whispered, his reading now more fluid in their quiet corner. "Because it has a strong heartbeat," Samuel replied, tapping the rhythm on the table. "And because it's about things that are beautiful and important." He looked at Leo, his expression serious but kind. "I was thinking, maybe one day you could read this for your mum, not for anyone else, just a gift for her." He had framed it perfectly. It was not a weapon to be used against Mark, but a gift to be given to Sarah. It was an act of love, not of war. Leo looked down at the poem. He read the first line silently to himself, his lips moving. A new kind of light appeared in his eyes. It was not just the pride of accomplishment, it was the steel of purpose. He was no longer just a boy hiding in a library. He was a warrior, preparing for his moment. He nodded. "Okay," he whispered, a world of determination in that single clear word. "Let's do it." The back corner of the library had transformed. It was no longer a dusty, forgotten space, but a rehearsal stage for a quiet revolution. For 2 weeks, Leo and Samuel had dedicated their secret sessions to the 8 lines of Robert Frost's poem. The words had become a prayer, a mantra. They recited them to the steady beat of the metronome, their whispers growing stronger and clearer with each passing day. Samuel watched as Leo's transformation took hold. The boy's shoulders were a little less hunched. He held his head a little higher. When he practiced their poem, a look of intense, focused concentration would settle on his face, a look of a craftsman honing his skill. The stutter, while not gone, entirely had retreated. It was a beast that now lived on a leash, and Leo was slowly, painstakingly learning to become its master. On a Thursday afternoon, they were having their best session yet. Leo stood, his back straight, the book held in his hands. He didn't need the metronome anymore. He had internalized the rhythm, the steady heartbeat of the verse. "Nature's first green is gold," he began, his voice soft but clear, each word a carefully placed stone in a beautiful wall of sound. Her hardest hue to hold. Samuel sat at the table, his hands folded, a look of profound pride on his weathered face. This was it. The boy was ready. The evidence was complete, a living, breathing thing. At that very moment, Sarah was walking down the quiet, empty hallways of the school. Her parent-teacher conference had ended 20 minutes early, a rare and welcome gift of time. Instead of waiting in the car, she decided she would surprise Leo and pick him up from his library project. She smiled. To herself, pleased at the thought of the school giving him a little responsibility. Mark had been skeptical, but it seemed to be a good thing for the boy. As she neared the library doors, she heard a sound that made her stop. It was a voice, a child's voice, speaking clearly and confidently from within the library. It was a sweet, melodic sound, and for a moment she couldn't place it. Curious, she crept closer to the door and peered through the small, rectangular window set in the wood. Her eyes scanned the room and found them in the back corner. It was Mr. Samuel sitting at a table, and standing before him was Leo. Her Leo, and he was the one who was speaking. "Her early leaf's a flower," Leo recited, his voice filled with a gentle confidence she had never heard before. But only so an hour. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, a soft gasp escaping her lips. Tears instantly welled in her eyes. It was a miracle. The frustrating, painful struggle that had defined her son's speech was gone, replaced by this beautiful, flowing river of words. She saw the proud, gentle smile on Mr. Samuel's face, and a wave of gratitude so intense it almost buckled her knees washed over her. He had done this. This kind, quiet man had given her son this gift. She felt a pang of guilt for ever doubting him. She was about to open the door to run to her son and wrap him in a hug when the front doors of the school burst open down the hall, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Mark strode in, his face a thundercloud of impatience. He was looking at his watch, clearly furious. Unbelievable, he muttered to himself, not seeing Sarah, who had shrunk back into the shadows of an alcove near the library door. He stormed toward the library, his destination clear. He shoved the door open with such force that it slammed against the wall. "There you are," he boomed, his voice ripping through the peaceful sanctuary. "I have been waiting in the car for 10 minutes. What in the world are you doing in here?" The change in Leo was instantaneous and catastrophic. It was as if a light switch had been flipped off, plunging him into a familiar darkness. His back, once so straight, curved inward. The book trembled in his hands before slipping from his fingers and falling to the floor with a soft thud. The confident boy she had seen through the window vanished, replaced by the terrified, broken child she knew from home. Mark's furious gaze fell on Samuel. "And you," he snarled. "I thought his mother told you to leave him alone. What is this nonsense? Are you trying to fill his head with garbage?" He turned back to Leo, who was now trembling, his eyes wide with terror. Mark jabbed a finger at him. "Look at you. Pathetic. I told you to wait outside. Was that too complicated for your broken brain to understand?" Leo tried to speak, to defend himself, to apologize. I was... The stutter was back, a violent, raging storm that crashed over him, leaving him shipwrecked and voiceless. He couldn't even get a single word out. From her hiding place, Sarah saw it all. She saw the miracle, and she saw the man who had been systematically destroying it every single day. Every lie Mark had told her, every dismissive comment, every time he had called Leo's struggle attention-seeking, it all came crashing down on her. She saw the truth. She was looking at a monster who tormented her son, and she had been his willing accomplice. The scene in front of her was not an accusation. It was a verdict. It was the most important discovery of her life, and it happened in the devastating silence between a father's cruel words and his son's shattered voice. If you believe this monster deserves to be exposed, hit the like button and subscribe, because you will not want to miss what happens next when a mother finally opens her eyes. The world seemed to hold its breath. The echo of Mark's cruel words faded, leaving a thick, poisonous silence in its wake. Leo stood trembling, a ship capsized by a sudden storm, while Mark loomed over him, his face a mask of furious indignation. Mr. Samuel, standing by the table, was a statue of quiet, sorrowful resolve. He had done all he could. The rest was no longer in his hands. Then a new voice cut through the silence, low and dangerously calm. "Get away from him." Mark spun around. Sarah stepped out of the shadows of the library entrance, her face pale, her eyes burning with a light he had never seen before. All the softness, all the eager-to-please warmth he had so easily manipulated was gone. In its place was something cold and hard as diamond. For a moment, Mark was speechless, his jaw slack with shock. He had been caught, but a lifetime of deceit and manipulation was a powerful reflex. His shock instantly morphed into righteous anger, his best defense. "Sarah, thank God," he said, his voice a performance of relief. "You need to handle this. This man," he pointed an accusing finger at Samuel, "has been meddling, filling Leo's head with absolute nonsense. I come in here to find them, and he's been completely undermining our authority." Sarah took another slow step into the room. She didn't even glance at Samuel. Her eyes were locked on Mark, a predator's unblinking stare. "I heard you, Mark," she said, her voice chillingly devoid of emotion. "I heard every word you said." "Then you heard me trying to instill some discipline in your son," he shot back, raising his voice to regain control. "Something you are too soft to do. He was supposed to be waiting outside. He disobeyed. He needs to learn that there are consequences." He tried to make it about rules, about parenting, about anything other than the naked cruelty she had just witnessed. He was trying to create an argument, a familiar landscape where he could twist her words and make her feel guilty and confused. But she didn't enter the maze. "You called him pathetic," she stated, the words dropping like stones into the quiet room. "You called his brain broken. It's tough love, Sarah. For God's sake, are you really going to take the side of a janitor over your own husband?" he pleaded, trying to frame it as a choice between them. But Sarah was no longer looking at her husband. Her gaze had shifted to her son. She saw him standing there, utterly defeated, the beautiful confidence she had witnessed just moments before completely erased. And she saw Mr. Samuel, who met her eyes for a fraction of a second, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a signal. It was an affirmation. Sarah's focus returned to Leo. "Leo," she said, her voice softening, but still firm with this new, terrible strength. "Sweetie, look at me." Leo slowly lifted his head, his eyes swimming with tears and confusion. "Breathe," she said softly, her voice carrying an echo of the lessons she didn't even know he had learned. "Just breathe." Leo looked from his mother's desperate, loving face to the quiet, steady presence of Mr. Samuel. He saw his protector, the man who had shown him patience. Then he looked at Mark and saw his tormentor, his face now a mask of outrage. In that moment, Leo felt a tiny, flickering spark of the courage he had been practicing in secret. He took one shaky, deliberate breath. His mouth opened and he fought through the storm of his own fear. He calls me." The effort was immense, his whole body tense. He squeezed his eyes shut. "He calls me be broken." The word, his tormentor's favorite weapon, was spoken. It was halting. It was imperfect, but it was the truth, and it landed in the silent library with the force of a bomb. It shattered the last of Mark's defenses. He stared at Leo, his mouth agape, utterly defeated by the victim he had worked so hard to silence. Sarah's face crumpled for a second, a look of pure agony passing over it. Then, the diamond hardness returned. She looked at Mark, and for the first time, she saw him not as the charming man she had fallen in love with, but as the monster her son had been hiding from. "The phone call," she said, her voice a whisper. "When his friend was over. You didn't tell me," he laughed. "You told me Leo had a tantrum." She took another step. "The dinner table, the way you counted it wasn't a game, it was a humiliation." Every small cruelty she had dismissed, every lie she had accepted, now replayed in her mind in perfect, horrifying clarity. She had been a fool, and her son had paid the price. "Get your things out of my house," she said, her voice now flat and final. "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah, you're being hysterical," Mark scoffed, trying one last time to belittle her, to regain his power. "Now," she commanded, her voice rising with a righteous fury that shook the very shelves of the library. "Get out of my sight, and if you ever come near my son again, I will make sure every person in this town knows exactly what kind of a monster you are." Mark looked from her furious face to the quiet janitor, to the small boy, who was now standing a little straighter. There was no one left on his side. He was exposed, his power gone. A sneer twisted his handsome features. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the library, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the room, the final violent punctuation mark on the end of a nightmare. The slam of the door echoed for a long moment, a final violent tremor from the earthquake that had just torn their world apart. And then, silence. It was a new kind of silence, vast and fragile, holding the space where the fear used to be. Leo was still trembling, his eyes fixed on the door, as if expecting the monster to burst back through it. Sarah didn't hesitate. Her rage, which had been a burning shield, dissolved, revealing the immense, aching grief that lay beneath. She crossed the remaining distance to her son and sank to her knees, bringing herself down to his level. The pristine knees of her trousers met the dusty library floor, but she didn't notice. All she could see was her son's face. "Oh, Leo," she breathed, her voice cracking. "Oh, my sweet boy." She didn't hug him right away. First, she just looked at him, her eyes tracing the lines of his tear-streaked face as if seeing him for the first time. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words a torrent of guilt and regret. "I am so sorry. I didn't see. I didn't want to see. You were trying to tell me in so many ways, and I didn't listen. I'm sorry." At the sound of her words, the dam of Leo's stoicism finally broke. A great, shuddering sob escaped his chest, the first sound he had made since his tormentor had left. It was a sound of pain, yes, but also of profound, earth-shattering relief. He collapsed into his mother's arms, burying his face in her shoulder, and he cried. He cried for all the silent, lonely nights, for all the words he had swallowed, for all the fear he had carried alone. Sarah held him tightly, her own tears soaking his hair. rocking him gently as if he were a baby again. "It's over," she murmured over and over again. "It's over now. I've got you. I'm here." Mr. Samuel stood by the table, a silent, respectful sentinel. He bent down slowly, his old joints protesting, and picked up the fallen book of poetry. He smoothed its creased pages and placed it gently on the table, his part in the great battle now over. He began to gather his tools, intending to slip away and leave the mother and son to their reunion. "Please," a voice called out, stopping him. "Don't go." He turned. Sarah was looking at him, her arm still wrapped securely around Leo. Her eyes were red-rimmed but filled with a gratitude so immense it seemed to radiate from her. "You," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saw him. When I was blind, you saw him." Samuel felt a flush of discomfort at the praise. He was not a man accustomed to being the center of attention. He simply gave a small, humble shrug. "He's a good boy," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A strong boy." "He's strong because of you," Sarah insisted, standing up and gently guiding Leo with her. They walked over to the old janitor. "What you did, I don't have the words to thank you. You saved him. You saved my son when I couldn't." "You saved him today, ma'am," Samuel replied, looking at Leo with his kind, steady gaze. "You gave him the courage to use his voice." The three of them stood there for a moment, an unlikely trio in the quiet, dusty corner of the library. The space was no longer a secret training ground, but a place of rebirth. Leo, feeling safe between his mother and his protector, looked down at the book on the table. He reached out a small, hesitant finger and traced the title. He had not gotten to finish, but he had won. Sarah placed a hand on Samuel's arm. "How did you know?" she asked softly. "How did you know what to do?" A sad, distant look came into Samuel's eyes. "I had a Mrs. Gable once," he said simply. "A long time ago. Seemed only right to pass the favor on." Sarah understood everything in that simple sentence. She saw the shared history of pain, the legacy of kindness passed from one generation to the next. Her eyes welled with fresh tears, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of awe. "Come on," she said, her voice finding a new, steady tone. "Let's go home. Our real home." She took Leo's hand. As they walked toward the exit, Leo let go for a moment and turned back. He ran to Mr. Samuel and, without a word, wrapped his small arms around the old man's waist in a fierce, tight hug. Samuel stood still for a second, surprised, before his own large, work-worn hand came up to rest on the boy's head. When Leo pulled away, he looked up at the janitor and gave him a small, watery but genuine smile. Together, the three of them walked out of the library, leaving the shadows and the secrets behind. They stepped out of the silent school and into the soft, golden light of the late afternoon, a new and unlikely family bound together by a shared truth and the quiet courage of a boy who had finally found his voice. 6 months passed. The chill of autumn gave way to the harsh quiet of winter, and then, slowly, melted into the gentle, hopeful light of spring. The world outside was coming back to life, and so was the small world inside the house where Leo and Sarah lived. The sharp, sterile silence that had once defined their home was gone, replaced by a new sound, the comfortable, easy hum of a life being lived. Books were now left on the coffee table, a half-finished drawing of a spaceship lay on the kitchen counter, and sometimes the faint rhythmic of a wooden metronome could be heard from Leo's room. Their house was no longer a showroom, it was a home. Mr. Samuel had become a quiet, steady fixture in their new life. He came for dinner every Sunday, bringing with him stories of the school and a quiet wisdom that Sarah had come to rely on. He never offered advice unless asked, but his calm presence was an anchor for them both. He and Leo would often sit on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes just watching the world go by in a comfortable silence that was now a language of its own. They were, in the truest sense of the word, a family. The final proof of their new beginning came on a warm Thursday evening in May. The Maple Creek Elementary School auditorium was packed, a cavernous room filled with the buzzing energy of parents and the scent of popcorn. It was the night of the annual spring showcase. In the audience, Sarah and Samuel sat side by side, their programs resting unopened in their laps. They weren't like the other parents, who were fidgeting with cameras and craning their necks for a view of the stage. They were perfectly still, their attention fixed, waiting for one small moment in the show. Backstage, Leo stood in the wings, the bright stage lights warming his face. He could hear the muffled roar of the crowd. A year ago, this sound would have sent him fleeing into the shadows. Tonight, he felt a flutter of nerves in his stomach, but it was a normal, exciting kind of fear, not the cold, paralyzing terror that had once been his constant companion. He clutched a small, smooth stone in his pocket, a stone Samuel had given him, telling him it was a courage stone. Finally, it was his turn. He walked out onto the stage and into the spotlight. He was part of a group of children who were each reciting a short original poem. When he reached the microphone, he looked out into the sea of shadowy faces. For a moment, his breath caught in his chest. Then he found them. His mother and Mr. Samuel, sitting in the fourth row. His mother gave him a tiny, encouraging smile. Mr. Samuel gave him a slow, deliberate nod. It was all he needed. He took a deep, calming breath, just as he had been taught. The auditorium, with its hundreds of people, faded away, and for a moment, he was back in the quiet, dusty corner of the library with his friend. He began to speak, his voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the room. "There once was a lion," he said, the words flowing smoothly, "whose roar was a whisper, a secret he kept. He lived in the shadows, while the other cats slept. Then a guardian found him, a keeper of trees, who taught him the rhythm of the wind and the leaves. He learned that his true voice was not loud or grand, but a steady, quiet strength held right in his hand." He paused, and for a fraction of a second, a small hesitation, a tiny echo of his old struggle appeared on the word strength. But it was just that, an echo. It did not break him. It did not silence him. He pushed through it. "And now, when he speaks, the whole forest can hear," he finished, his voice ringing with a quiet pride. Not a roar of great anger, but a whisper of, "I'm here." He finished, and a profound silence held the room for a beat. Then the applause erupted, warm and genuine. He looked out and saw his mother's face, shining with tears of pure joy. He saw Mr. Samuel, his proud smile the greatest award he could ever receive. Leo took a small, formal bow, and as he stood up, he allowed a wide, brilliant smile to spread across his face. It was the smile of a boy who was not broken, who had never been broken. It was the smile of a boy who had been lost in the woods and had finally, with the help of a kind and patient guardian, found his way home. A single act of kindness can be the light that guides someone out of the darkness. Leo's story is a reminder that the strongest heroes are often the quietest ones, and the most powerful victories are the ones won with patience and love. If you were touched by their journey, please share this story so that more people can be inspired to become a guardian for someone in need. Thank you for watching.